that's true. Naked Palpatine.
Oh, you pick that one. Fresh out of the clone tank, nude Palpatine is my
Well, that's the first thing I think of when you say Dark Empire Palpatine. Where to begin? God Emperor of Dune by Frank Herbert. The fourth book in the Dune series. The weirdest, and probably, if I had to bet money on it, never a film adaptation of God Emperor. We are 3,000 years from the events of Children of Dune. Emperor Leto II, the worm god, Shai-Hulud, has been ruling with an iron fist for 3,000 years. All in accordance with his golden path to ensure that future humanity will survive whatever threat comes their way, while being reviled and hated as an evil dictator. The book actually begins with the foreword, so after this story is actually told, with them finding Leto's secret journals. And then we get into the actual story, which 80% of it is philosophical musings by Leto Atreides. The main plot, everybody wants Leto dead. He's been a dictator for 3,000 years. He is control of everything. He is control of all spice. So no one moves across space without his say-so. No one does anything of note without Leto's say-so. Not the Bene Gesserit, not the Tleilaxu, not the Spacing Guild, not the Great Houses. No one does anything without Leto already knowing about it and approving it. So a lot of people don't like that. Siona Atreides is one of them. And she wants to take him down, which is exactly what Leto Atreides wants. Along the way, we meet characters like Monio Atreides, who is Leto II's second in command, is Major Domo. And we have another Gola of Duncan, because Duncan must always come back. Jason Momoa cannot ever truly die. And it's also a love story. We must remember the TV adaptation may have made, Leto a bit older, as it's kind of hard to find 9-year-old good actors to do really complex and nuanced performances. But in the book, Leto is 9 years old. And when he goes on this golden path and puts on the sand trout, he's still 9 years old. So for all of his normal lifespan and most of his adulthood and teenage years, he was a worm. He never had a normal life. And of course, he stays true to his vision of the future and his goals. But regret can still seep in, especially when you fall for someone and realize that you can never truly be with that person in the way that someone else could because of the decision you made. It is quite a confusing, weird read, but it's my favorite. It's this, Dune Messiah, and Dune, and then Children of Dune, so far for me. None of those are bad. which is kind of how I feel about them personally. I understand if someone does not like this book, though. And I don't think they'd be wrong to say they don't like it. It is very much an acquired taste, and it is not for everyone. Not everyone is going to enjoy this book. I can promise you that. There's also some problematic musings in here at times that are a bit hard to swallow. But outside of that, I mean, it's still a product of its time. This is like, what, 1980? I forget when this book came out, but it's an older one. 1981, yeah. So there's some stuff here that's a little, you know. But overall, I think it's still a phenomenal time. I do recommend it. I don't want to say anything more in non-spoiler wise. There's a bit more to say in spoiler wise, but this is gonna be it for me. But if you read Children of Dune, I do recommend giving this a shot at least. Go find it at the library. I'm sure it's there. You know, and if you like it, then spend your money. But read the almost probably unadaptable book in this franchise. Because the furthest they'll probably ever go movie-wise is Children. I don't see them ever doing this one. If they do, I'll be shocked. Okay. So, in the beginning, there's a friend of Sayona. His name is Kulog, and he kills a wolf with his teeth. Wolves are attacking them, and he decides to chomp down on this wolf's neck and rip out its like stuff. Like, that's crazy. He still dies, but that's such a baller thing to happen. The golden path, in the simplest terms, is the survival of humanity. Also, Arrakis is now a green paradise, just like Paul had originally promised. It is not a desert anymore. And humans only live up to 100 now, which, you know, is normal for us, but they lived a lot longer in the Dune universe beforehand. Ooh. One key part of the Golden Path is that while Leto can see the future, he will not, and refuses to see how he will die. He leaves it up to a surprise. Now, one thing about Leto is he is a worm man, and at times he loses control and the instinctualness of the worm takes over. And whenever that happens, Monio likes to get the hell out of Dodge because anything in the room when Leto gets like that dies. Also, Duncan clone tries to murder Leto, then dies, and then they make another one. That's the one we follow for most of this book. Nayla is a spy for Leto, and she uses computers to communicate with Leto, so he's not following the rules as much. But he also tells Nayla to follow Sayona explicitly, even if Sayona were to tell her to kill him. One interesting part is that Sayona forces Nayla to tell her why and truly she's so obedient and loyal. And Nayla says, because of God. Which, of course, Nayla means the God Emperor. But Sayona takes it completely differently. It's just funny how there's a misunderstanding there. They learn through the journals that even after Leto became a worm, he still loved his sister dearly. So Sayona says, we have learned his weakness. He loves, or he has the capacity to love. There's also no more Mentats at this time. Like, again, Leto's in so much control of all this right now. And then they mention this quite a few times in the novel. I'm only saying this now because I know this is going to be a future title of a future book. But the chapter house of the Sisterhood of the Bene Gesserit keeps getting brought up. And then we get introduced, then we get probably the most action part of the whole book. I mean, there's like maybe 3 scenes off the top of my head I can think of. The ending, a part where Leto goes on a full rampage, and then this one, which is the Ixians attack, and they try to kill Leto, and he uses his like cart to like bash into them and break them. It's a crazy scene. And then Duncan, because these face dancers dressed up, they all look like Duncan. So what does Duncan do to distinguish himself? He strips naked and fights and kills them naked. Duncan's crazy, man. There's some problematic rhetoric in discussing like homosexuals and them making great warrior fighters, but them also like not perpetuating the species, and that's like a problem, which sure, but there's just a lot of weird conversations with that. There's some stuff with women too that people may not be the most fond of, but it's weird at the same time. He also like props women up a lot, but there's just a lot of weird stuff that it wouldn't be too bad if it helped with the plot, but a lot of it is it's literally just musings by Leto. Like he's in his own headspace, and he's just going off and going off about things, which is basically just a mouthpiece for Frank Herbert. So it's just like, I don't know. Those parts I'm not the biggest fan of. Leto's also the biggest troll because a lot of times he knows what he's already gonna do or knows what someone's thinking, and he'll act like completely oblivious or argue just for the sake of it. Sometimes it feels like, and it's funny. But the big shift in tone and change is when Leto falls in love with a woman named Hwai, which is Howie Nori. I think that's how you're supposed to say it. And she's an Ixian creation, meant to be perfect for Leto. There's a part, because of the Ixians trying to kill him, that he decides to have a public flogging. But also, he doesn't actually explain why he's giving the public flogging, because he doesn't want to tell anyone that the Ixians attacked him. So he just orders this flogging and expects that they'll know the reason, but the rest of the galaxy doesn't know why. He's just having them flogged. And then he goes, okay, we'll drop it from 50 to 20 because I'm so merciful. But again, nobody has any context for what's going on. So I just think it's really funny. There's also this mention of an Ixian machine to transcend time. I wonder what they mean by that, because they don't really address that here. But Leto has a very human struggle. This is one of the things that got to me reading it. Because he's so inhuman, and yet so very human. You know? And he chose this. He knew what he was getting himself into. He saw the future. He could see the future. He could see eternity past. You know, he can view any memory of any ancestor ever. So, you know, like, he can see people have sex. You know, like, because he couldn't have an ancestor if they didn't do the deed with someone to keep that line going. So he has an infinite history of memories to go back on. But having a memory of something, especially one that's not your own memory, and actually feeling it are two completely different things. Not that sex is everything in love, but Leto's very lonely. You know, like, his sister's dead, everyone he truly knew and loved is dead. And he has, you know, bonds with these people, or like, he keeps recloning the Duncan clones, because he remembers having a strong attachment to him in children. But they are clones, or Gulas, or whatever, and they eventually turn on him. You know, and then the closest thing he has is Manio. But again, there always has to be this separation between himself and God Emperor. And like, how much of himself is actually left when he's just been doing this for 3,000 years? You know, someone either is trying to plot against him, or they're obeying him implicitly because he is the God Emperor. But there is no one who is truly there for him or wants to be with him for the sake of him, you know? And he chose that. He knows that. But at the same time, realizing what you have to do and feeling that on the day to day, it ebbs and flows. That's how humans work. That's how humanity functions. But he's a very lonely individual with no true voice and no true companionship for 3,000 years. And again, he put that on himself, but that doesn't stop the emotion from coming through. It's like the loneliest being in existence, and everything he's doing is so that they will all hate him and see him as the example to never follow again. So that humans will have a better future through his bad example, which he purposely puts on. So he remains lonely and sad, but does all this for the greater good of humanity, knowing full well that half of humanity in the future will see him as a villain. No matter what his stolen journals say, half the population will hate him forever. He'll be known as a villain instead of what he wanted to be, which was a hero. It's just so very human for an inhuman godworm man. And Duncan and Siona meet up, and Siona tricks him and takes him to this village, which has a son of a previous Duncan clone, which was pretty messed up. And the son's like, "Get out of here! You're not my father." And I mean, that's a whole thing. I mean, like, how do you even deal with that? Like, what does that mean? If you're a clone of someone, and that someone as a kid, like, you may have not been with that kid, but in some sense, that still is your kid. So it's a whole thing. But Leto wants Duncan to get with Siona for some breeding program stuff, but it doesn't fall through. But he kind of explains himself later on, I think, to Hoinari about the whole thing with his golden path, which is that hardship and neglect breed longing and strength. So he keeps an iron grip on everything and is very strict. So that way people will hate a dictator, like forever. It'll be boogeymen stories about it. He also restricts space travel and makes it very hard to leave the planet because by doing that for so long, people will forever want to travel the stars as a means of freedom because he's so conditioned them to feel that being stuck on a single planet all their lives is slavery. But that's another thing too. Like Duncan gets really upset about that. But like we only have one planet. We don't even explore all of that ourselves. We don't. So he's not putting people in cages. He's just kind of restricting them to one place, which, you know, yeah, I guess you could say from broad strokes is slavery, but you know, they still have freedom within the planet. Um, but that's that. Also, Duncan loves Hui Nari. I don't know. It feels like it comes out of nowhere, just because stakes and tension. I guess. I don't know. There's also a sex scene between them that I didn't need, didn't ask for, but we have it. I guess she just needed to get her needs out one more time because you can't do that with Leto. I don't know. Um, Leto tests Siona later on, and is like a little secure, which is interesting. Um, there's a part where Leto's really struggling with knowing that at some point he's going to die and wanting to be with Hui, and well, he's struggling with that decision. The golden path keeps flickering in his brain, like as if he could still change the outcome. Like if he decided to just go off rails from it, but he stays true to it. But it's just interesting that it kind of like flicks in and out of his mind as if like literally his decision could affect whether it still stays on course. We reached the end of the book, and Leto's going across this bridge to get married, and Siona and Duncan finally make their plan. They shoot up the bridge, and Manio falls to his death. Hui falls to her death, and then Leto falls into this like river or ocean or whatever. And so he's already like dying. The sand trough's leaving him, but he makes it to this cave. And, you know, he's not happy, but he's kind of content because his plan's going into motion. It's happening. Meanwhile, Duncan and Simon are just kind of gloating over his death. And he's dying alone with no one to miss him, which is just kind of sad. But yeah, he can't see Sayona in the future, which is what he wanted. He wanted the future humans to be able to be unseen by prescience. So even if someone else gets prescience, they can't see what's up with humans. Like, what are they up to? They can't see it. And he wants that. Because some threat will come in the future, they'll be able to, like, see that. And he wants people that won't be able to be seen in prescient visions. And then he dies. And that's that. What will the world look like after this? We'll have to see the next story. It takes place like 1,000 years from now. But there's a lot of great things about this book. There's a lot of cool things like the fish speakers, which are like an all-female army, which is pretty cool. And like I said, a lot of interesting philosophical musings and discussions throughout this whole thing. But ultimately, it's just a very lonely book, but also about love and playing 4D chess with everyone. And it's hard to fully explain how you'll feel reading this book. Like, you'll either think it's like a masterpiece or you'll hate it, and I get either or opinion. But overall, I think this is stellar. Like I said, I completely get it if you don't enjoy it, and there is some weird problematic stuff in here, but it's overall one of my favorite reads of Dune so far. And I know where the story's going from here a little bit, and I'm not particularly excited. I'm not even talking about the Brian Herbert and Kevin Janderson works. I'm just talking about the next two books by Frank, which I just sound weird on principle, but we'll see how that is when we get there. And that's pretty much it for me. Don't forget to walk with rhythm. Till the next time, guys, don't let Shai Hulud eat you, and stay on the golden path. Bye-bye.